Hello, today we will begin our exploration of historical content. We begin with a survey of the ancient world, starting with the regions of ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Feel free to pause the lecture video as needed to take notes. I like to begin my historical content lectures with a map to help us situate everything geographically first. You'll notice near the center of the map the label Mesopotamia, which is the land that rests between two great rivers flowing through the arid desert of the Middle East. In fact, the name Mesopotamia is a Greek term that means between two rivers, from meso, meaning the middle, and potamos, meaning rivers. These rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, provided a predictable source of water for ancient peoples, allowing them to develop agricultural cultivation with regular access to these waters with planning and irrigation. Notice where the major landmarks and city-states are identified on this map, conveniently located next to one or both of these important waterways. Specifically, we will begin to examine some of the major monuments and objects from the prominent city-states of this region, namely Ur from the Sumerian civilization, Nimrud from the Assyrian civilization, and Babylon from the Babylonian civilization. Many historians call ancient Mesopotamia the cradle of civilization, primarily because it was one of the most prolific regions for early human urban development. As early as 3000 BCE, major urban centers were forming in the fertile lands between these rivers, which encouraged communities to organize into larger groups and specialize in different industries, from farming to construction to metalwork and more. Life in these cities was dominated by religious beliefs and ritual. The cultures were polytheistic, meaning they held many gods and goddesses in their religious belief system, and devoted their lives to constructing temples, monuments, and objects in the service of devotional ceremonies and daily practice. As we shall see, the political control of this large geographic area shifted from one civilization to another over the span of more than 3 millennia. We begin with the Sumerian civilization, named for the region of Sumer in what is now southern Iraq. The Sumerians are considered the first great political power in Mesopotamia, developing into a distinct civilization between 3500 and 2340 BCE. Not only are they credited with creating the first organized political entity in the region, they are also lauded for the invention of important agricultural mechanisms, such as the wheel and the plow. These likely helped Sumerians establish successful urban centers with a production of a surplus of food to sustain a large population and engage in commercial exchange or trade. They also developed one of the earliest known forms of writing, called cuneiform, which allowed individuals in Sumer to document the goods and services of its cities, establish laws, and record epic stories, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the first works of literature. This example of an early writing tablet from Sumer gives modern viewers a sense of the type of writing that existed around 3000 BCE in this area. We can see a series of parallel and overlapping lines organized into different square-like frames. These lines and markings likely represent products, such as bushels of grain, and the sequence of markings signify quantities, showing the practical role that written language played for citizens of early Mesopotamia. The Sumerians were also known for creating something much bigger than writing tablets. They built enormous stepped pyramid monuments to hold temples, shrines, or altars for religious ritual and worship. These large monuments rose up from the arid, flat desert, visible from miles away, and thus easy reminders of the prosperity and power of the authorities as well. Most importantly, they offered a way for humans to get closer to the gods in the heavens above. The best preserved example of these religious monuments is the Nana Ziggurat of Ur, located in southern Iraq today. Built by King Ur-Nammu of Sumeria, it is an enormous structure that measures 210 feet long, 150 feet wide, and more than 100 feet tall. The structure is comprised of baked mud bricks, which would have required an astonishing amount of human labor to manufacture and assemble. The temple itself is dedicated to the moon goddess, Kamnana, a patron goddess of the city of Ur. It also probably served as a place where citizens of Ur received foodstuffs and rations, tying together religious practice and practical needs. Originally, the Nana Ziggurat was likely covered with colored, glazed bricks set in mosaic patterns, creating a bright and shimmering vision rising high above the flat earth around it. Its monumental scale would make anyone feel small and insignificant in comparison, reinforcing the importance of the gods and the necessity of the offerings and rituals that would take place here in worship of them. Though it does not retain its colorful exterior, it still conveys a sense of magnificent permanence for us today. The other object from the Sumerians that we will view is called the Standard of Ur. A standard is a banner or other kind of identifying object usually placed at the top of a pole and carried in military campaigns or processions. Most historians do not believe this object is a standard. However, the name has stuck. What we see are two views of one object. We essentially get to see both sides at once. One side depicts war, shown here at the top, and the other side depicts peace, shown here at the bottom, with each side organized into three horizontal registers of imagery. In the war scenes, the topmost register depicts the ruler in the center, slightly larger than the surrounding figures, receiving his prisoners of war and accompanied by his attendants. The middle register shows the soldiers on the left and the prisoners of war on the right, and the lower register shows the energy of battle, with soldiers driving horse-drawn chariots to crush their enemies underfoot. In the peace scenes, the three horizontal registers show something quite different. We have noble figures seated and enjoying cups of wine and musicians at the top, with the ruler seated at the far left. Then we have the middle and lower registers showing commerce, people leading livestock and carrying bushels of grain to signal the prosperity and abundance of the civilization. The brilliant blue of the lapis lazuli allows the shell inlay to stand out brightly, creating a dazzling effect as our eyes follow the rows of imagery and take in the details and implications of the scenes. Next, we will examine the Assyrians, who ruled over the northern area of Mesopotamia from a large capital on the Tigris River called Nimrud. The Assyrians are credited with some of the first monumental architecture and decoration associated with the royal residences or palatial complexes, making the designation between the ruling king and his subjects more distinct. They relied on enormous amounts of slave labor for its construction, as well as the maintenance of agricultural production, irrigation systems, military success, and artisanal production as well. One of the most famous objects from the palace of King Ashurnasirpal II in Nimrud is the human-headed winged lion, called the Lamassu. This hybrid creature combines the best attributes of these powerful beings with the mind of the human, the speed of the eagle, and the strength of the lion. The Lamassu was situated at the gateway of the palace, greeting and intimidating those nearing the entrance of the palace. If you look closely, you'll notice something surprising about the lion body of the Lamassu. If you count the legs, you'll find 5 instead of 4. Because of its location at the corner of the gateway, the Lamassu is actually depicted in multiple perspective, where 2 different experiences of the figure emerge depending on the angle and placement of the viewer. If viewed from the front, the Lamassu appears to have 2 sturdy vertical legs, probably emphasizing the king's power and presence. But if viewed from the side, the Lamassu has 4 legs, with 3 of them shown at slight diagonals, suggesting movement to complement the dynamic energy offered by the wings. If this creature is a representative of the king's power and a protector of his realm, we can easily see how the lines, features, and monumental scale work together to impress any viewer. If the Lamassu wasn't enough to impress, other parts of the palace complex contain detailed scenes in low relief that showcase the king's powerful abilities. King Ashurnasirpal II is shown here atop a horse-drawn chariot, pointing his bow and arrow at the lion's head at point-blank range. He appears unfazed by the movement of the chariot or the ferocity of the lion, who has been purposefully agitated by the clanging of cymbals from the king's attendants at the far left. The Assyrian king is placed over everything else in the scene, emphasizing his position of control and his domineering presence over the world of man and beast below. The last civilization from ancient Mesopotamia that we will discuss are the Babylonians, who came in and out of political control several times over the course of this region's history. They attained power once more by defeating the Assyrians through strategic alliances with other city-states, and were recorded in the book of Daniel for their harsh suppression of the Jewish people around 600 BCE. Under the Babylonians, their capital of Babylon flourished into a lush and abundant city in the midst of an arid desert, thanks to its close proximity to both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now southern Iraq. We will look at one representative example of the impressive building campaigns undertaken in Babylon during its height around the 6th century BCE. Here we see the bright blue Ishtar Gate covering the long avenue known as the Processional Way, a lavishly decorated corridor that played host to important parades for religious celebration and led from the entrance of the city to the Temple of Marduk, another prominent god and patron of the city. The gate was built by King Nebuchadnezzar II to serve as the main entrance to the city of Babylon, and pays homage to the goddess Ishtar, who presided over phenomena including love, fertility, and even war. The Ishtar Gate has been reconstructed from excavated fragments and displayed in Berlin, where we can get a better sense of the size of the structure and scale of its components. Covered in glazed and colored bricks, the mosaic shows a lineup of animals, including giraffes, lions, and even dragons, in rows that float on a deep blue background. The lowest row of animals come up to about eye level for the average viewer, giving the sense that they could be overpowered by a large animal at any moment. These animals pay tribute to other deities within the pantheon of Babylonian beliefs, in addition to Ishtar. Clearly, King Nebuchadnezzar II wanted to create a stunning impression to anyone arriving in Babylon. We now venture slightly southwest from Mesopotamia to explore some of the monuments and objects from ancient Egypt. Just as we did before, we see major centers developing along the edge of the most significant waterway in the region, the Nile River. There were traditionally two kingdoms of Egypt, made up of Upper Egypt to the south and Lower Egypt to the north, with the names reflecting the directional flow of the Nile from south to north, where it drains into the Mediterranean Sea. This constant access to the Nile River allowed for the settlement of communities and the creation of large urban centers, since agriculture and irrigation could be developed to coincide with the predictable flooding and receding of the river. Egypt is a long-lasting civilization with dynasties of kings called pharaohs, ruling in succession for nearly 3,000 years before they were conquered by the Greeks. These pharaohs were not only powerful and fearsome leaders, they were also given divine status, and their burial tombs reveal the importance of maintaining the practice of honoring and remembering these kings in death just as in life. This was in addition to the worship of other gods, as the Egyptians also practiced a polytheistic religion. Like the Sumerians, the Egyptians had a written language, yet their script is made up of hieroglyphs, or pictographs that represent ideas and objects from the world. Emphasis was placed on the movement of one's spirit, known as their Ka, into the afterlife upon death. Despite the long history of ancient Egypt, there was very little stylistic change in terms of their artworks. This was intentional. One of the key tasks of a pharaoh was to maintain the order and customs set forth by their predecessors, and the maintenance of a consistent style was a way to show consistency in the culture as well. What we tend to see with depictions of human figures in ancient Egypt is the emphasis on flatness in painted works and on stillness in sculpted works. Bodies are often idealized and posed to reinforce a sense of permanence and unwavering constancy and strength. Much of what we know from ancient Egypt comes from the construction and objects placed within funerary architecture. Enormous pyramids and other monuments were built to house the deceased bodies of pharaohs. These tombs were begun while the pharaoh still lived and continued to be constructed and refined throughout his lifetime, which can explain their size and ornamentation. We will look at one complex of funerary architecture called the Great Pyramids of Giza, which housed pyramids for 3 successive pharaohs from what is termed Dynasty 4 in Egyptian history. This reconstruction drawing of the Great Pyramids of Giza show their close proximity to each other and the presence of surrounding structures that contributed to the cult practices and continued offerings presented to the pharaohs here long after their deaths. On the far right, we have the Pyramid of Pharaoh Khufu, which began construction around 2550 BCE, and it is the largest of the 3. In the center, we have the pyramid and sphinx for Pharaoh Khafra, the son of Khufu, and construction of this complex began around 2540 BCE. The pyramid to the far left is the smallest and houses the tomb of Pharaoh Menkaura, begun around 2490 BCE. Though it is the smallest in size, it contains the most elaborate interior of maze-like chambers within it. The long strips of land leading to these large pyramids were causeways upon which the deceased pharaoh would be guided to his final resting place. Each of these pyramids contained several other buildings around it to serve as altars and temples where subjects could continue to bring offerings and preserve the memory and spirit of the ruler. Here we see the large sphinx situated in front of Pharaoh Khafre's pyramid, with the body in the shape of a lion and the head in the shape of a man, likely meant to portray the likeness of the deceased pharaoh himself. Though much of this giant sculpture has remained on guard here for thousands of years, its nose has been lost for over 1,000 years. Legend has it that Napoleon and his troops shot at the nose with a cannon, but there's very little evidence to back that up. What we can see clearly, though, is the shape of the pyramid itself. Unlike the tiered structure of the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt are smooth and slanted, with a wide base inclining to a point at the top. The pyramid was thought to prepare the pharaoh to join the divine spirits and gods upon his death, drawing him up toward the heavens. It is also suggested that the shape of the pyramids recalls the powerful rays of the sun, that important life force that rises and sets predictably each day. Along with the pyramids, freestanding sculptures were constructed to portray the pharaohs and function as cult images. Many of them are sculpted from durable, dark stone in the surrounding areas and often portray an idealized version of the ruler. Here is one view of the statue of Pharaoh Khafre, who likely commissioned the sculpture of himself. He is shown seated on a throne, with his bare chest displaying a strong and youthful body. He maintains a calm expression and displays two different hand gestures, a closed fist in his right hand and an open palm in his left. Perhaps this combination of gestures communicates the features of his rule as king over his people, firm yet generous. A side view of this sculpture gives us some more details to ponder. We see the falcon god Horus embracing the back of his head, offering his blessings and protection. Horus is often associated with protecting royalty, serving them in important ways, such as avenging their enemies, defending their territory, and establishing unity between the two kingdoms of Lower and Upper Egypt. It's no surprise, then, that Khafre wants us to know that Horus is on his side. This sculpture is about life scale, so viewers could encounter a very lifelike image in a number of ways. The details of the throne also help direct the viewer's gaze by offering a vine-like pattern of papyrus reeds that draw our attention to the lion's feet serving as the feet of the throne, reinforcing the message of Khafre's control over the flora and fauna of the land. Some of these sculptures portray the pharaoh with other human figures in addition to gods. Here Menkaure is shown walking side by side with a queen, presumably Khmer-Erenebti II. She holds on to his arms in a supportive fashion, offering the perfect complement to his athletic and youthful frame. He holds his hands in fists by his side as he steps forward, showing the impression of movement while maintaining complete control and calm in his upper body and face. Although these forms are somewhat stiff or static, they show a clear interest in portraying realistic volume, mass, and proportion of the human body. At 4 feet 8 inches in height, this sculpture is slightly smaller than life scale, making it easier to approach for the average viewer. A very similar stance is portrayed in wall painting as well. The figure of Nabommum, an important official who served as an accountant and scribe, receives a cycle of wall paintings depicting scenes of his daily life within his tomb upon his death. His skills as a hunter are clear here, as he catches an elusive bird in his hand, and his wife to his right holds a canister containing the many bird carcasses he has already caught. He balances in that split leg stance on a raft atop the water, and the artist has shown the aquatic life moving underneath. Here he is in what's known as twisted perspective, where his lower body, his legs and his hips, are in profile, and his upper body, from his navel through his shoulders, is twisted to face the viewer, and then his head again is twisted back in profile, something common of depictions of human forms in ancient Egyptian art. Though his small daughter holds on for balance, Nabomu himself appears perfectly at ease. The hieroglyphs in the background of the scene here describe him as enjoying himself and seeing beauty, explaining his capacity to appreciate his surroundings and participate in life to the fullest. Nabomu was not a pharaoh, but he was prominent enough to receive such fine artistic treatment upon his death. For one's life force, or Ka, to travel to the afterlife, the deceased was often buried with items they enjoyed during their life here on earth to nourish, protect, and comfort the spirit on its journey. In Nabomu's case, he would be surrounded by scenes of his successes and pleasures in this world. Not a bad way to go. The cycle of wall paintings from his tomb have been preserved and displayed at the British Museum, so we too can imagine what his final resting place would have looked like when it was created. Our final two objects reveal the Egyptians' increasing interest in showing lifelike qualities of its rulers, especially in depictions of their facial features. This bust of Queen Nefertiti was recovered in an artist's studio. This bust likely functioned as a model for other, more permanent sculptures. The materials used here reveal its temporary use, but the limestone model and plaster layer on top of it allowed the artist to make very subtle and realistic features. This bust shows incredible symmetry and balance, creating a sense of harmony and order. This new aesthetic interest was important for this figure, since Nefertiti was the wife of the pharaoh Akhenaten, who established a new form of religion in Egypt that stressed the worship of one god, the sun god, Aten. This is one of the most radical changes in the long arc of ancient Egyptian history, and this pharaoh claims that only he and his wife have access to this new god. A new artistic ideal that emphasized naturalistic curvature, softer features, and more realistic scenes from daily life became more apparent. The son of Pharaoh Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, was credited with returning Egyptian political and religious traditions back to its older order before Akhenaten redirected religious devotion to the sun god Aten. Though Tutankhamun did not rule as pharaoh for very long, he is one of the best remembered pharaohs thanks to the discovery of his elaborate and largely intact tomb complex in the early 20th century. Buried in the area known as the Valley of the Kings, near the city of Thebes, which Tutankhamun had re-established as the capital of his kingdom, the tomb was uncovered in 1922 by British historian Howard Carter. What Carter eventually uncovered was an enormous complex of several chambers filled with treasures, including chariots, chests of precious jewelry, sculptures, and more. What we see in this slide is the gold death mask that was found on top of the mummified and wrapped body of the pharaoh himself, inside the innermost coffin of several nested coffins and sarcophagi. This mask is made of 2 sheets of gold, which were hammered together, and weighs over 22 pounds. In addition to the gold, Inlaid pieces of precious stones create a dazzling design of alternating patterns and colors. The mask displays youthful, idealized features we have come to expect from likenesses of the pharaohs. And in Tutankhamun's case, he was actually young when he died, around 18 or 19 years old. The headdress, beard, and symbols of the condor and the cobra all identify him as the ruler of both Upper and Lower Egypt. Though he did not rule long, he will never be forgotten. Nearly 2,000 years after the pyramids of Giza, the tomb of Tutankhamun displayed the same attention to grandeur and impressive permanence stressed by the ancient Egyptians. This concludes Lecture 5, Ancient Mesopotamia and Ancient Egypt.